Time stuff, guys. All right, so recording has started. Let's go ahead and begin. Like I said, we're talking about and debating the role of the U.S. in the rest of the world. Where does the U.S. fit in on this whole global stage thing, right? And again, we're debating imperialism. So, first key point. Imperialists will cite economic opportunity, racial theories, competition with European empires, and the idea that in 1890, the frontier is closed. And they will use those reasons to argue that Americans were destined to expand their culture and institutions to other people around the globe. So basically what you have here are the reasons why certain members of the United States or certain people in the United States will argue that we should become an empire. We should start taking other territories in the world instead of just focusing on our lower 48 states that we got right here. This is in the early 1890s that this starts happening. So I'll give you about 2 minutes to get that list down. It's a really important list for what imperialists will argue about. These are the things they're going to argue, and then we're going to define what each of these are in the next couple of slides. And again, an imperialist is just somebody who wants empire, who wants to make an empire in the United States. That is an imperialist. About another minute and a half on the clock. Get the first key point down, and then we're going to move on. I'm going to try to go through this really quickly because we have a limited amount of time. So if you're one that likes to take a little bit more time, please grab screenshots as we move along. And of course, the video is going to be uploaded this afternoon. I will not forget to hit publish like I did yesterday. So by the way, yesterday's video is already uploaded. Those of you that just came in. About 1 minute left on the clock. Thirty seconds. Make sure you have this first key point in so we can move forward. And we're going to talk about our exam and stuff at the end. Don't worry, I didn't forget. We're getting ready to move forward in about 15 seconds. Make sure you're ready to go. If you need more time, please grab a screenshot because we got to move on. We got a shortened class today. All right, moving forward. So imperialism, question mark. There's a question mark on there for a reason. So back in the 1860s, right? Well, what's something that Americans are doing throughout pretty much the entire 19th century? Like from the second you hit 1800, 1803 era, what's the U.S. constantly doing, like as a nation? Somebody in the chat tell me. And you can send it privately, publicly, don't matter. But what's the U.S. doing? Like, what's the one constant thing that Americans always are doing or want to do or get into trouble for doing? Expanding west, right? Expanding west, right? It's an American's favorite thing to do is expand west, right? This was back pre-colonial, but it's certainly the case when we talk about the 19th century. So in 1867, though, there's no more continental U.S., right? This lower 48's done by 53. And so the U.S. will buy Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. It was not connected to the main continental United States. It's the first U.S. territory that was not connected to the main United States, right? The lower 48 as it's called. And well, here's the thing. So it's bought and initially people are like, oh, it's a frozen wasteland. What a waste of $7.2 million. But then we find gold in Alaska. And so when 1898, when gold is discovered, all of a sudden it was an amazing idea, right? Hey, it's like retroactively an awesome idea. So because Alaska is filled with gold, the idea of expanding past the lower 48 starts becoming exciting to people. And again, if you remember from a few weeks ago, we talked about Frederick Jackson Turner and the frontier thesis. The idea that the frontier is closing also makes people think, well, we need to keep expanding, right? So we need to keep going outside past the frontier. So the concept of imperialism and expanding your land outside of your territory, or expanding to land, I should say, outside of the territory, starts becoming really exciting around this time. And what do you need from this slide? You need to point out the stuff about Russia. The Frederick Jackson Turner stuff we should have already covered, right? Just note, frontiers closing leads to concern. People want to expand more, right? Because frontier closing means, well, where are we going to go now? So they start looking, hey, maybe other places in the world have gold we can find or resources. So I'll give you a quick minute and a half for imperialism, question mark, maybe. And then we'll move on. Actually, we're only going to do a minute. No, we'll do a minute and a half. Then we'll move on. Minute and a half on imperialism. And the slides are already in Google Classroom, by the way. That's the actual Treasury slip, by the way, from purchasing Alaska. It's hard to read, but that's so you can see the 1869 right there. 69, I think that's a 69. Even though it's purchased in 67. Like the deal was made in 67. It's kind of cool. There's the 72 million right here. This is the real thing. Putin's got it in his office, probably. I made that last part up. I don't think he does, but I don't know. It's kind of cool. Again, I get excited now that we're in time periods where you can see pictures of stuff, of the actual stuff that was happening, the actual deals that were being made. Or like the actual check that we bought Russia with. About 20 seconds and we're moving on. Make sure you are ready to move forward. So, imperialist arguments. These are reasons why pro-imperialist people in the United States will argue for empire. Alaska proves that the U.S. there's value outside of the United States. So Alaska is proof that there's value, right? There's an opportunity for new markets for goods and for trade. So basically you can sell manufactured goods to these places, or you can sell agricultural goods to these places like foodstuffs. Social Darwinism strikes again, right? And if you don't remember what social Darwinism, there is the definition. If you don't remember social Darwinism, the definition is right there for you to write it again. Because social Darwinism, again, that idea that nature works on survival of the fittest, so should politics and economics. Not really a great idea, but hey, strikes again. And Europe is doing it. Basically, if we don't expand with Europe, then the rest of the world will see us as weak, right? All the big, strong countries have big, strong empires. We need a big, strong empire. So those are some of the reasons why imperialists will argue for empire. There's a few more that we'll get into on the next slide. I'll give you about a minute and a half. Again, you just need to name the items. So if you don't remember Darwinism, explain it. Europe is doing it. That one you probably need to explain. But new markets open up. Alaska is proof. Alaska proves the point, right? It's the proof of the concept. It's the exception that proves the rule. Ignore that last part. That one didn't make sense. But it proves the concept. It proves the idea that, hey, if you get land outside of the lower 48, probably going to be some resources there that we can use. Probably valuable. Land is always valuable. About a minute on the clock, then we're going to move on. And I know we're going really fast, so if you do have a question, please stop me. I will explain as best I can. About 10 seconds, and we're moving on. All right, let's get ready to move forward. Couple of more imperialist arguments. So you also have racial motivations, and not the good kind. So racial motivations by people like Josiah Strong, who was a preacher who mentioned and argued that white Anglo-Saxon race was the fittest race and the fittest to survive. These are real arguments that he made. He argued that it was the duty of white Christians, and well, you could just say Christians, but he means white Christians. So I wrote it as Christians, but be careful because he means white Christians. Like, there's no, usually I like to try to take, like, you know, this isn't opinion. He means it. You can read his readings. That's what he means. So it's the duty of white Christians to expand and spread their religion and their racial fitness and superiority to the rest of the world. That is a legit argument that he makes. He's like, it's your duty, be a good Christian, spread your like awesome whiteness to the rest of the world. It's a legit argument that he makes. And some people agree with him. Not everybody, some do. He's a little crazy, but hey, you know, it's the 1890s. So that's one reason, racial motivations. We got to help everybody, right? It's like remember the Bringing Progress to the West painting of the like angel lady spreading across, and like the poor Indians are there running away from progress, right? It's the same concept, progress. We got to bring progress to these places. Not a great idea, but hey, you know, he believed it. And then the other idea that becomes very famous during this time is the idea that you need a powerful navy to be a powerful country. We'll talk about this more in the world wars, but having a strong navy back then, especially during the very beginning of this era, right, the 1890s, was what made strong countries. Even before, right? It's part of why Britain was able to rule most of the world, is because their navy was so good. So in response to this, Congress will construct a massive navy of steel ships. So like a new navy, basically, like a brand new one. And if you want to rule the world with a navy, you need a lot of pieces of land throughout the world to facilitate your naval dominance, meaning your ships need places to stop for repairs and resupplies. They can't do that if you don't have any land anywhere. So that's another little reason why some people want to start grabbing land in other places, right? If you have land in other places, well, now you're able to actually use this navy and send it out everywhere, the way we have bases all over the world now. So I'll give you about another 90. I'll give you 2 minutes or so. There's a lot on here. And then we'll move forward. Again, are there any questions? Let me know. About a minute left on the clock. We're almost at the dreadnought stage. I'm so excited we get to talk about dreadnoughts soon. These are like proto dreadnoughts. Like some of them are dreadnoughts by the later end of this shipbuilding. Dreadnoughts, by the way, are battleship. Like when you're playing the game, they sunk my battleship. That's a dreadnought. But they were called dreadnoughts before they were called battleships. This is almost dreadnought era. This is, I don't even think those are the types. No, those are wood ships. Those have sails and stuff. My mistake. Put the wrong navy up there. It's the painting. These are all white and stuff. It threw me off. But these are, think more like ironclads, but 30 years later, so they're a little more advanced. They don't look like big bathtubs anymore. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move forward. My favorite era is actually the and there, so it's the gap in between. So you're not wrong, Jonathan. My favorite era is the gap between 1 and 2. It's how much the world changes in those 20 years. Don't get me wrong, I like talking about the wars too, but so we will talk about some of that stuff. Yeah, Battleship's fun, great game. But yes, I do. If it were up to me, I would teach just a whole course on, you can teach a whole course on that era. I've taken them. I took a whole course that's just about the Air Force in World War II, specifically in Europe. So much fun. So much you could talk about that stuff. Yeah, battleships. So let's get into key point 2. Anti-imperialists, now we're talking about the other side, right? Because this whole lesson is just an argument between two sides. Will cite principles of self-determination that invoke both racial theories and U.S. foreign policy traditions of isolationism to argue that the U.S. should not extend its territories overseas. So basically, they're going to argue about self-determination, which we'll talk about in a second. They will talk about racial theories as well, not great. And they will use U.S. foreign policy tradition, right? Foreign policy has always been isolation, to argue that the U.S. should not spread out around the world. Does anybody remember the first president to kind of be like, hey, be isolated? Like, stay away from the other parts of the world. Keep to yourself. Washington, right? George Washington's first one. Good job. Since Washington, we've been like, hey, stay isolated. But so people will say, hey, maybe we should keep that tradition up. Tends to not, go well. And we'll get into why in a second. So I'll give you another minute or so on here. Then we will move on. About 30 seconds. All right, getting ready to move on. So let's get into these anti-imperialist arguments. Self-determination, define this because we didn't talk about it before and you need to know it, is the idea or the belief, more time, sorry, just saw that. Okay, let's back up a little. I'll give you another 30 seconds. About half that time is up and then we'll move on. All right, going ahead to move forward. So again, self-determination, right? The idea, the belief that a nation should be able to decide who rules them. There are other aspects to self-determination, but the most important one, the one we're going to focus on, a nation should be able to decide who's in charge of that nation, right? The people should be able to decide. This is the exact reason why the United States separated from England to begin with, right? We should decide who rules the United States, blah, blah, blah. So people are going to argue, hey, if America starts taking over weaker countries, we are robbing them of their self-determination. Their right to self-determination is something we're taking away from them, right? Basically, it makes us look really hypocritical because we wanted self-determination, but we're not willing to give it to these other countries. And it's a very, I feel, sound argument, right? Hey, you wanted the freedom to pick who rules you, but you're going to go rule over other countries. So it's an argument a lot of people make. Whoa, the screen turn off for you guys now? No, it's back. It's an argument people will make. It's an argument that some people are making. Another reason anti-imperialists are going to argue against imperialism is because the U.S. has a long history of isolationism, right? They've even quoted Washington as saying, hey, Washington wanted to be isolated. Why are we not listening to him? He's Washington, blah, blah, blah. I don't know why I'm doing blah, blah, blah all the time, but so it's the argument being made. If the U.S. goes into the world in search of territory, they are opened up to potential issues, right? If we go out and we stop being isolated, we open ourselves up to the drama that the world is going to bring, basically. wars, economic stress, political pressure. And hey, guess what? It happened, right? The more involved in the world we got, there's literally going to be a couple of world wars that the US is going to get involved in and more. But so the less isolated the US becomes, the more open to stress or distress or drama, whatever you want to call it, that happens throughout the world. And that's another reason why a lot of anti-imperialists are saying, hey, don't empire, no empire. Doesn't necessarily work out for them. So let's move on in about, we'll go 2 minutes here because there's a lot of info on here. And we got one more slide, and then we're going to talk about the exam and then our exit ticket. It's a short exit ticket today. I know I say that a lot, but I'm serious this time. About a minute and a half left on the clock. By the way, why am I showing you all the Philippines? Anybody know? You can put no if you don't know, but does anybody know why I'm showing you the Philippines? Why do you think? No, not Vietnam. Vietnam's over here. Philippines. I just saw somebody put in. Yes. So very soon we're going to take them from Spain, sort of. U.S. expands out there. Yeah, the U.S. will own the Philippines, and we still do. Yes, the U.S. will own Guam. Guam is, yes, Guam as well. Puerto Rico. There's a lot of places we're going to get. So basically, this anti-imperialism stuff's not going to last. In fact, we are going to become very imperialistic very soon. But yes, we are going to take over the Philippines. The Philippines is going to be one of the larger U.S. land holdings in a lot of this region, and it's going to come back into play again in the Second World War, right? Because if you don't remember, if you don't know, Japan will invade the Philippines and they will take over the Philippines. It'll be like it's going to be a big stepping stone in the Second World War when it happens. So, but the U.S. owns the Philippines. So that's why I put them up there. Good job, you guys that did recognize that. So let's move on. Hold up, sorry. So now we're going to get into the not so okay stuff about these anti-imperialist arguments, because right now they seem like pretty cool guys, but let's get into some of the stuff they said. So they will make racial arguments as well. However, they question the way they structure their racial argument is this. They ask, does the Constitution follow the flag? Meaning that if Uncle Sam puts the flag in the Philippines and says the Philippines are American now, are all those Filipinos American citizens with rights and equal citizenship? Should all these not Americans become American citizens is the argument. And when I say not Americans, I mean brown people, right? And so they use that kind of the way other groups, right, have used race as this weapon almost. They almost weaponize racism that's going on. And they say, should we do that? And they bring up that question, and it's enough to make other people question, well, I don't know. I don't want to make a bunch of Filipino people American citizens. And it's something that happens, right? If you live in the Philippines, if you're from the Philippines, you're not an American citizen. Just keep that in mind. So the racial argument is going to be, do we make citizens of all these not Americans, right? Are all these not Americans now Americans because America took over this place? The answer to that question in the short is no. But that's the argument that they're going to make. Like, hey, it would be unfair to make all these people, all these not Americans, Americans. I know I'm saying Americans a lot, but I'm trying to, hopefully that makes sense. If that was confusing, please let me know, but I'll give you about 2 minutes for that. And then we'll move on. This is the last slide of notes, by the way. By the way, I can't stress enough, and I mentioned it earlier when we talk about the pro-imperialism thing. A lot of the countries in Europe are doing this. Everybody's doing this. It's part of why the First World War is going to start, or why other little wars start, like the Russo-Japanese War between Russia and Japan, or why the Germans start getting into some trouble because they keep wanting to expand. Expansion's a thing you do when you're a big, strong country to try to show all the other countries that you're big and strong, right? Try to compete with France, England, and all these places. So this is not new. This is not exclusively an American evil. This is a thing that everybody did. And America's trying to do it to catch up and look big and strong like the rest of them. That's why they go to war with a dying power like Spain, which we may talk about tomorrow. Well, no, we should talk about it. We'll at least get into it tomorrow. We won't finish the topic, but we will start talking about it. About another 45 seconds, then we're moving on. "15 seconds. If anybody needs more time, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to move on." All right. That's a good question. Are Americans most? No, I would say, depends who you ask. Now I would say a little bit more because of like the Trump stuff, but Americans, like, and I can't stress this enough. It's something that I like to point out because it's something people tend to forget, right? This isn't an exclusively American thing, especially this imperialism. They're copying Europe, right? They're doing all the stuff Europe did. They're just doing it a little later on, right? When they're doing it, there's pictures. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want you guys to like hate the United States more or less, but you got to know what they did because what they did wasn't okay. Just like what England did wasn't okay, right? Just like what Spain did. Spain did way worse stuff than this, right? Spain was straight up. They had a caste system, right? You guys remember that from last year. So they're not doing something new, but they're continuing something that was already not okay, right? But they just, people didn't know it wasn't okay. Does that make sense? So no, I would say not. I'd say they're about on par with most world powers. It's not that they're not actually, that's the thing, they're a rising power. Pretty much so what's a good example? Well, we're going to talk about some of this stuff later, but like in Vietnam, like the Vietnam War, that's a war England's fought like 30 times. They just fought it in the 1800s and the 1700s. You know what I mean? And when the US went and fought a war like that, there were news cameras and reporters and pictures, and you could actually live it and see it on TV every day. This imperialism stuff with like the capturing of the Philippines and taking all these lands and like picking fights with weak countries, that's what countries did as they got stronger. The thing is that the US is doing it in the 1890s and the 1900s when there's things like Kodak cameras, right? And photographs and eventually film recording. And the US is doing it at such a later date that everybody else is kind of wising up to maybe we shouldn't do it anymore, right? I'll give you the best example I can think of this. In ancient times, when you went and took over a place and kind of started living there, it was called conquering. During the Enlightenment, it was called colonizing, right? And during this era, it's called imperializing. Does that make sense? Like, it's the same thing. You're going to a place, you're taking it over, now you run it, but it's got 3 different names. Does that kind of make sense? Like, that's the change we're talking about here. And so by the time the US is imperializing, they're still basically doing what the Romans did way back when, or what the English did way back when, right? They're just the newest one to do it, which is why like nowadays you don't do it. You do it economically, and it's not what civilized nations do. Hopefully that makes sense and it wasn't just me rambling about historical stuff. But with that being said, let me move forward. Let's talk about the exam. So Unit 6 exam, it is 1 DBQ. It's about Unit 6. It's the most I can tell you. I can't give you specifics. It is Thursday, the 28th, so it's in 2 days. Tomorrow, come prepared with any and all questions you have about Unit 6. I know you guys are familiar with DBQs. I know your AP exam last year was just 1 DBQ. But we are going to go over doing DBQs tomorrow. A little bit, a refresher, how to do them, best practice, how much time you're going to have, all that stuff. And then Thursday will be, tomorrow we start the new schedule. So make sure you are ready for that and for the exam on Thursday. If there are any questions about the exam, it is 1 DBQ and it is on Thursday. You cannot miss it. You need to be here. Any questions? Questions going once? Questions going twice? Okay. So with that being said, one more thing. At 2 o'clock, around 2:15 today, 2 o'clock, 2:15 is when we're going to start. You need to go on to the 11th grade teams, the general 11th grade teams, and click the link on the new modified schedule post that Ms. Tyrell made. I'm going to put a link on the bottom of that at around 2 o'clock. Go into that link. We're going to all meet for an awards assembly. You need to be in there. We're going to acknowledge everybody. We're going to do some formal stuff, and then we will release after that. And then let your parents know at 5:15 we have a town hall on that same link. And the links are on Remind, and they will be in the 11th grade teams. Make sure you are here for that. You need to be here. That's why we're on a shortened schedule. And with that being said, let's get into the exit ticket. So let's go to Google Classroom. Like I said, short, easy exit ticket today. There's about 6-7 minutes left in the class. Should be more than enough. I'm going to go over it really quick, though, like we always do. Here we go. Okay. So, imperialism, easy question, right? Identify and explain the arguments for imperialism. Be specific, give examples. Then identify and explain the arguments against imperialism. Again, be specific, give examples. That's it. Easy peasy, simple exit ticket, 2 steps. That's all you need to do. It's a town hall 4. The town hall is just general information, right? Chance to ask questions of the grade team, all that stuff. It's just general information. There's nothing specific. We're going to talk about the schedule a little bit. Counseling team has some stuff.